Okay, if you don't have any questions, move on. Yeah. So, anybody that's ever used Unity before, you've probably heard of locally stored variables to persistent ones. When you're kind of storing a variable in your character, it's known as a local variable. But if we store a variable on a save game file, it's persistent. And I'm kind of going to go over the various stages in Unreal 4 and the way that works. So, one way that you can store data, okay, is on a local game object or a local character. If you don't respawn that character, okay, if it's always going to be in the level and you only have one level, sometimes that's okay. If the character is ever destroyed where you have to kill the character and respawn it, all the data in that character is going to be lost and it'll just revert back to whatever the default state it was in when you first press play. So there's a problem in that, obviously, because you might have a certain number of lives in your character, and when it loses a life, it has to respawn. But when it respawns, it's just going to come back with 3 lives, you know, its default state. So what you might want to do is sometimes store that information on a player controller, which is more persistent than a character. Because if you kill off a character, you're still going to have what's known as a player controller in your level. And then you can feed information from that controller back into your character. But if you're moving between levels, that doesn't always work out. Game mode is another thing that you can use to store information, but again, that's persistent in a level, okay? It doesn't carry through to other levels. Even if you reload the same level, all the information is going to be wiped in that. You're smiling. I don't know why you're smiling. It's kind of freaking me out. We're talking about variables. Nothing to really smile about. So this is where a game instance may come in. So this is just another game object that you have inside Unreal. Just another standard blueprint. And this here blueprint is persistent throughout a play session. So as soon as you press play, a game instance is spawned in your project. And no matter what level you go into, or if you go into a main menu or anything like that, that game instance is always going to be there. Which means throughout a play session, if you're storing information on that there, it's never going to get wiped unless you tell it to wipe it. The only thing wrong with that is, as soon as you turn off the computer or you quit your game, that game instance and all its information is then wiped. So that's why you have a save game feature in Unreal 4 or any other game engine really. So the data on that there, or the variables that you store on there, will be there until you overwrite them. So that's the kind of end game that you want to get to, is the save game feature. And it's not that hard to add in. I'll kind of go through each one of these and show you how they work and their kind of limitations as well. So if we go into our project, I'm going to open up this HUD map. And what I mean by game controller and character, I'm going to press play here. And I don't know if you noticed over here, if I stop it, you can see that it starts to spawn in all these different objects when I press play. So press play. I've got all these different objects that it spawned in. One of them is obviously my first person character, okay, so it's spawned in my character. But another thing that it's actually spawned in is this player controller. And the best way to think of a player controller is it's like a middleman between your user interface, your physical one, like the keyboard, mouse, gamepad, and your character. Okay, so the player controller takes input from a physical device like a gamepad, and it relays that to your character to tell it to move or jump or whatever. Whenever you destroy a character, you can ask your player controller to respawn another one and feed information to that character when it's respawned. So for instance, I'm going to go to my character here, and I've got a lot of things going on which I'm going to bypass. So if you notice in the top right hand, I've got an ammo counter which is broken. but for this here demonstration it should be okay. And you can see if I'm shooting it, it'll go down, okay, by 3. Just for some reason I'm shooting 3 bullets. I can't remember setting this up, but I am. So I'm shooting 3 bullets. If I press escape, press play, that disappears, okay? All that information that's been stored in that variable disappears. If I ask my character to destroy itself and respawn through a player controller, if I don't pass information to that player controller and then back again, all that information is going to be lost as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new folder. I've done this a couple of times. And I'm going to create a new controller for my character. So I'm going to right click, Blueprint class, and you can see it's one of the defaults that you can use there. So player controller. And I'm going to call this car control new. Okay, haven't used that one before. And open that up. It's like a basic standard blueprint. Okay, you've got a viewport, construction script, event graph, and it's kind of the event graph that we want to focus on with the controller and the player. So I'm going to create a custom event in here in my controller, and we'll call this respawn. And what we want to do with the respawn is destroy an actor, but we don't want to destroy it itself, so we're going to get the control pawn. So this is the object that we want to destroy, the control pawn. So whatever the controller has possession over, we're going to destroy that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spawn an actor from class. It's going to be our first person character, and we're going to pull out the return value. We're just going to possess that. And the target's going to be the player controller. So one last thing. I'm going to try and figure out where I want to spawn this, and I know in my level I've got this player start, but instead of making a reference to it through a variable, I'm just going to do it a cheap way, where I'm going to get all actors from class, and the actor, it's going to be a player start, and then I'm just going to get the first one in that array, and from that I'm just going to get its transform. And plug that in. So just to go through that, whenever this custom event is called, it's going to destroy the actor or the character, the first person character that it's got a control over. It's then going to get a player starting or level, and it's going to get the transform for that, and then it's going to spawn another first person character there, and then the controller is just going to possess that one. So we're not passing any information between anything right now, we're just respawning a character. Okay, that's all we're doing. So if I compile and save that, what I want to do is go to my first person character, and I've got this hitch input key that I'm going to use, and I'm going to cast to car controller new. I wish I had named that differently, and it's just going to be the player controller. And we're just going to get the respawn from that. So whenever I press hitch, it's basically going to destroy myself and then respawn myself. Okay, pretty simple. You could have a custom event in there that's just called death that does that for you. The reason that you want to keep it in the player controller though is that whole thing is it's persistent, and it's just going to, the controller's not getting destroyed, the character is, and it's easier then to, you know, script the respawn. The one thing that we have to do is, since we've started up and we've made a new player controller, we've got to tell our game mode to use that player controller. So if I go to my character, there's a first person game mode in here, and this just tells the level, you know, what by default we should be using in terms of characters, controllers, AI, that type of thing. And you can see here there's a player controller class, and we just want to change that to our card control new. That's a terrible name, don't use that one. And if I press play here, you can see that it's added that there controller in for us now. Okay, it's not spawning the other one that we had created, it's spawning this new one instead. So if I go around here, shoot, and press hitch, you can see it's respawning me back to the start. Obviously there's no presentation to this, you know, it hasn't brought up your dead or anything like that, hasn't played a sound or brought up a HUD or anything, but it is respawning the character. And you can see with my ammo, when I do that, it's going back to 0. But if you had points as a player and you wanted to keep them persistent in the level, you know, we should be passing information between the character and the controller. And we're going to set that up now. I'm going to use my ammo, but if you had a points-based system, you can also use that as well. Because at the minute, everything that's stored in my character, it's just getting wiped when I respawn. So what I can do is, I can go to my controller class, and I can just add in a variable here, and I'll just call this player ammo, and just change it to an integer. Compile and save that. And then in my first person character, whenever we call that respawn, or just before the respawn, what we could do is we can get that ammo now that's in our controller, that variable. So if I just type in ammo, and we can set that from the ammo that we've got in our character. And then when we respawn, this event begin play, that fires off. So whenever you introduce a blueprint or a character to a level, this here event begin play node always fires off. So I know what I should do is I can cast, I'm just going to copy and paste this to my controller. I can get the ammo from that, and then I can set my ammo in the character. So if I press play, shoot a bit, 21, press hitch, it'll still be at 21, yeah. So that controller's now just kind of saving that information and passing it back. What I wouldn't do, like I'm just doing this for a demonstration, but that event begin play, you probably want to have that as a function. So this here section as a function, because I'm just doing it for one variable, where you guys might be doing it for 20 variables, okay? I'm not saying it has to be that many. So if I was doing it for 20 variables, this here is going to get quite messy out my event graph, so you probably want to just have that as a function, and it makes it a lot easier to do. Yes? No? Is anybody confused by that? So really you're just passing information from one variable and then back again. Instead of doing the respawn, so we're still sending information back to our controller, or to our controller and then back again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen the level that we have, just by getting the level name and plugging that into the open level. So anytime I press hitch now, it's still going to send that information to my controller, but instead of doing the respawn, it's actually just going to open up the level again. And when it does that, my player is going to kick off this event begin play again. It's going to cast to my controller, and it's going to get that ammo amount. So I'm going to shoot, and you can see when I do this, the problem is when it restarts the level, the player controller is also wiped, so that's not persistent throughout levels. So that's another issue. Okay, so what we use for that is a game instance. Has anybody ever used a game instance before? Have you ever heard of a game instance? Maybe. These are very non-committal. So a game instance, if I go back to my save test 3, I'm just going to right click blueprint class, and if I type in game inst, it is just another blueprint, okay? It's just another object that we can use. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to call this new game instance 3. We'll go with that, and we'll save all. Now, for this to actually spawn in your level and for you to be able to use it throughout your kind of gaming session, we don't actually just physically drag and drop it, or it doesn't automatically spawn for us. What we actually have to do is go into the game settings. So if we go to settings, and if we go into project settings, there's a bit in the left hand side called maps and modes. Matty will probably be going over a lot of this next week, because you have to set part of this up for packaging your game. But right at the bottom, you can see that there's a game instance class, and this is where you're telling your project or your game, look, I want to use this game instance as my game instance throughout the play session, and you can only use one, okay? And I've set up one, so new game instance 3 is the one I've just set up. Click on that, close it. You don't have to save anything, it's just done for you. So what we're going to do, we're going to open up this game instance, and we're going to create another variable in here. We'll just call it player ammo again, change it to an integer, and it's exactly like a player controller, only that it's persistent throughout levels. So if I go back to my first person character, instead of casting to my controller and setting the player ammo, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to cast to game instance 3, and as an object identifier, all you have to do is pull that out and type in game instance and get game instance, because there's only ever going to be one, and Unreal understands that. From this here, get ammo, and I'm going to set it with the ammo that I've got in my character. It's still going to load up a new level, and then when I event begin play, instead of getting it from my controller, I'm going to cast again to my game instance. I'm going to get the ammo from that, and I'm going to set the player ammo to be exactly that one. If I shoot now, press hitch, you can see even though I've opened up a new level, that variable is persistent now, okay? Any questions? There's never going to be a question, is there? This is kind of our last lecture as well. I'd like a question. You are always on your phone.
I told you.
I'm going to ask you questions. Right, so the last thing that we're going to do now is move on to creating a save game file. So this is a bit different from anything that we've done in this session, in that you have to create a file, you've got to save it to a slot, and then you've got to load from that slot as well, and make sure that there is a slot to load from and everything like that. The best way to do this is from a function, okay, or multiple functions inside your character, or whatever blueprint you want to use. You can use a game instance for instance, if you wanted to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 new functions. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to load up these ones and delete what I have in them. Yeah, that would be better. Load new, save new. So I've created 2 new functions there. One's called save, one's called load. So if you're going to use a game slot, you probably want to use a function. It's just a lot easier to call upon, and it's a lot easier to manage inside the event graph as well. So inside our save one, what we want to do is we want to create a save game object. Oh, I'm going to delete these. whenever we do that, oh, I forgot. We've got to create a blueprint class to start off with. So we're just going to right click, blueprint class, and we're going to call this one save game. And we'll call this save game 3, just to make it stand out. So again, just like a game instance, a save game is just a blueprint class that you can create. Into the first person character, I'll start this again. So from save game, we're just going to create the save game object. This is a bit weird, but what you want to do is, first of all, see this return value, it's just a variable. You want to promote it to a variable, okay? Before you change the class in here, it just makes it easier. We're going to name this here player info, because that's what we're saving. And then the save game class, we're going to get our save game 3. After that there, we're going to cast to our save game 3, and we're going to have to access a variable in here just like a game instance. So I'm just going to go to that blueprint for my save game, which I haven't opened, and again I'm just going to create a variable and call it player ammo and change it to an integer. Compile and save that. So from that, I'm just going to grab my ammo, or we're going to set it. And the best way to do this is, instead of grabbing your variable here, what I'm actually going to do is the save game, I'm going to create a new input there. I'm going to change that to an integer and just call this ammo. And then I'm going to plug this in. It's a bit hard to see, so I'll add a few reroute nodes. There we go. And then I'm going to pull it from this here, and we're going to save a game to a slot. The save game object is just going to be the player info that we created, and the slot name, I'm just going to name player info as well, make it easier. This boolean after this here is a check on whether the game has saved it or not. So what we can do is, just to check that it has, I'm just going to add in a branch, and if it hasn't saved, I'll just put out a print string, which I'll color red, and I'll just say game not saved. And if it has saved, another print string, game saved, and we'll put that one green. So that's it for that one. What we're going to do now is go to the load, and here we've got to check first of all if we've actually saved the game before. So we're going to say does, well, you just probably does save game exist, okay? Slot name, we're going to put in a player info, and then return value, again we've got to branch this off. So we're going to put in a branch, and what we'll say is, if it hasn't, we're going to add a return node, and with an output for that, it's just going to be ammo. And this is where, like, if it can't load anything, if you haven't saved, you probably want to put a default value in here for your ammo. So for instance, I can load in like 60 or something like that. So if I've never saved before, I can go by default, I just want to load in 60 instead. If it has saved, we're going to load from game slot, which is going to be player info. I think that was a capital in the start. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to get this player info and set it as our game object, and then from that there we cast to save game 3, get our ammo, and we'll plug that into a return node. So this is a function with 2 return nodes. So if it doesn't have a game to load from, it's going to return 60, and if it does, it's going to get into that save game and it's going to access this variable and have that as a return value instead. And that is it. So what we want to do is, in the event graph, whenever we press hitch, I'm actually going to save the game. So I'll go to save new, pull out that function. It's asking for, you know, an ammo that I want to save. So I'm just going to grab the player ammo, plug that in. And then when we event begin play, we're not going to go to our instance anymore. Event begin play, all we're going to do is load in. So every time this is loaded, or the game or the players spawn, it's going to load from a file. And we're going to set our ammo from that. It was hitch, wasn't it? Yeah. So if I shoot that, press hitch, you can see in the top left it says game saved. Okay. Press escape. I've gone out of the game now. Press play. I'm still at -45. So it's loaded that slot in. And I could put a check in there just to make sure it has loaded. So I could put a print string in here. Again, you don't have to use print strings. You can have like widgets that pop up and say game has been loaded. There you can see it's loaded. And you see if I don't press hitch to save, so it's at -63 there now. I haven't saved, so when I press play, it's still loading from that previous slot until I press save. And again, you don't have to have it tied to an input. Okay, you could have a quick save feature if you wanted to. That's fair enough. But you can tie it to like a pause screen if you want to save from a menu, or if you quit in your game, you can ask the player, do you want to save before you quit? And then you just call a custom event that's going to call that function. That's all you have to do.